Good afternoon, friends, and welcome. My name is Allison Gampel, and I am the Associate Director of Alumni Programs at York University. And although we are not all in the same location now, it's important that we do acknowledge the land that York is on. Many Indigenous nations have long-standing relationships with the territories upon which York University campuses are located that precede the establishment of the university. York acknowledges its presence on the traditional territory of many Indigenous nations. This territory is subject to the Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Covenant, an agreement to peaceably share and care for the Great Lakes region. This afternoon is the fourth and final talk in the GRADitude speaker series, which, as many of you know, is a series that connects our newest grads to our amazing alumni family. So, like I've said in the first three sessions to our grads, we know that this is not the way you plan to graduate, but you did it, and we are incredibly proud of you. And we warmly welcome you to your extended family. We are 325,000 people worldwide who you are now a part of our family. So welcome, congratulations, and hope that you enjoyed some celebrations as you received or are receiving your convocation celebration materials. I'd like to do some housekeeping before we begin. For those of you who have not been on webinars like these, you can find at the bottom of your screen a Q&A button. And if you need any technical help, or if you have a question for our speaker or for me, please type your questions there. There's a team of associates of ours who are behind the scenes, and they're there to help you. So please feel free to use that Q&A button to get the help that you need. If you still have questions after the talk, please feel free to connect with me personally or connect with anyone on the alumni engagement team. We can be reached at alumni&friends@yorku.ca, and we always welcome your ideas. As the class of 2020 graduating in this unprecedented time, you have a special place in our hearts, and what we can do to help make this journey as seamless as possible for you in these difficult times is something that we care deeply about. So before you meet our alumni panelists, who I'm very excited to introduce you to, we would like to know just a little bit more about you. So in a moment or two, a poll question is going to pop up on your screen, and we'd like you to answer it when you see it appear. The question is, how confident are you about being able to meet any coming challenges in the next several months? I see that it's popped up on your screen, so I'll give everyone a moment to respond. Okay, so thank you all for participating and for your honesty. And it's, you know, there's no right or wrong answer to this question, but hopefully this talk that you're about to experience will give you some tips that will help you just feel a little bit better about your journey as it goes forward. So this is the moment that you're here for, and I am truly honored to introduce you to our alumni speaker. Today we have Dr. Mark Wilchesky. And I'll just read you his bio in order to do him justice before I hand the floor over to him. So Mark has had a career at York University for 34 years, and he recently retired from his position as Executive Director of Counseling and Disability Services. Mark was a practicing psychologist in the province of Ontario for over 35 years until his recent retirement from the profession on June 1st of this year. Although I hear he's not doing retirement that well, and I thank you for stepping out of retirement and being here. His main areas of interest have been support programs for students with disabilities at the post-secondary level and counseling services for post-secondary students with mental health concerns. Dr. Wilchesky has lectured widely on topics related to accessible education, as well as promoting resilience for students, faculty, and staff in both the post-secondary and secondary school settings. So Mark, thank you so much for being here. We appreciate you, and I will hand it over to you.
Well, thank you, Allison. And I'm hoping everybody can hear me. Some of you, I can see Allison nodding her head, so I'm assuming everybody can hear me. And thanks for taking part of your day to spend with me. I hope you're in some place that's reasonably cool, wherever that may be. Pretty hot out there. Thank you for taking the time to spend this part of the afternoon with this old retired psychologist and listening to some of what I have to say. I'm going to just take a moment to share my screen and start the PowerPoint, and we'll go from there. So just bear with me, and we'll hope that all the technical stuff works out today. So as Allison said, the topic today is building resilience in times of adversity. And I don't want you to feel this is something that it's like all the other sort of TED Talks or other kinds of talks you've seen where it's all these self-help ideas about what you can do to be the best person you can be. It's some of that, but it's also, I'm going to be saying many times today that being resilient is not just something that you do by yourself. Being resilient really involves what you bring to it and what you take from other people, what you have and what you also receive from the people in your environment. And hopefully you'll keep that in mind as we go through some of the presentation today. So first off, first things first, as you heard from Allison, congratulations on this graduation, and in doing it in a time that is full of challenges. It's not at all what you thought it was going to be, what any of us thought it would be, but you've done it. And in doing that, you've already shown how resilient you have been, because you've had to overcome a lot of the challenges. So congratulations, and I hope that you're doing well as you're continuing on your journey. Many of us, and I'm sure some of you, are grieving the loss of normal, and we fear the uncertainty that surrounds us. There's a tremendous amount of uncertainty, and it seems like the uncertainty grows every day as we move through the different phases and stages of this pandemic. And uncertainty is very uncomfortable. None of us feel comfortable when we're uncertain about what's to come. And some of us, I'm sure, are dealing with, I hope you're not dealing directly with the illness yourself or with any friends or relatives, but some people are. And if you are, I hope you're coping reasonably well with that challenge. The other thing that I just want to mention is that this pandemic, I'm sure you realize, hits people in many different ways. It has a differential impact on various groups, particularly on groups that are poor or marginalized or racialized, people with disabilities, the elderly. The pandemic has created tremendous challenges for everybody, but particularly for some of the more marginalized groups that I've just mentioned. And it's really tough for all of us to handle. It's been improving lately in Ontario and in Canada and in Toronto, so I'm grateful for that. But even so, it still poses a lot of challenges for all of us. And I think all of us are wondering what will happen as we open up and as things, as people maybe start to relax in terms of what they do in terms of social distance or wearing masks or so on. I won't get into all of that today, but there's still a lot of uncertainty, and dealing with the restrictions is still very, very difficult for everyone. A couple of months ago, there was a major poll done by the Angus Reid Group. And just to give you, I'm sure this is news to anybody, but when people were asked to describe how they've been primarily feeling in recent weeks, Canadians were most likely to say they're worried or anxious. And again, being uncertain creates some discomfort, and having discomfort usually creates a lot of anxiety and a lot of worry in people. It sort of feels like Mother Earth just sent us all to our rooms for a timeout to think about what we've done. This pandemic has sort of hit us. None of us were expecting it. None of us really saw it coming. And it almost feels like, what the heck is going on here? Why are we dealing with all this stuff? So what's my goal today? It's mainly to share some ideas on resilience that will help you enhance your mental well-being and will help you navigate successfully through the challenges that are posed by the pandemic as you pursue further academic studies or embark on your career path. Again, this is not meant to be a cure-all. It's just some ideas that might help you feel a little better about things, might help you see things a little bit differently, and I hope will encourage you to use the resources that are available to you in your community, whether it's in your family or your peer group. If you're lucky enough to have a job, or if you're continuing in school, your peers there. Remember that this is not just something you have to do by yourself. It really is something to do with other people, that is being resilient. So we all face challenging events in life, and right now we're dealing with some major challenges, but anyway, in any situation, we have setbacks at home, at school, or in employment settings. Sometimes people get ill, either yourself or your friends or family. Unfortunately, people have losses. They may have a death in the family or death of a close friend. There may be catastrophic natural disasters or other traumatic events that happen. There are all kinds of challenging events in life, and all of those events can be moderated if you have a strong sense of resilience. So right now, obviously, the big challenge is dealing with COVID-19. But again, COVID-19 is layered on top of other challenges. I'm sure as recent graduates, you have the excitement of graduating and what's coming next. But at the same time, there may be all kinds of challenges that you have to face, whether it's health challenges, financial challenges, relationship challenges, whatever it might be, housing. So the challenge is dealing with COVID-19 in addition to what you're dealing with aside from COVID-19. So just very quickly, what is resilience? I'm sure you've been hearing a lot about this because there have been all kinds of people talking about what resilience is. But it's basically being able to weather the storms of life, staying buoyant in life's rough waters. And I like the last one, being able to adapt well, moderate the impact of adversity, and bounce back from severe distress or even life-altering situations. This last one, this last bullet point, being able to adapt well and moderate the impact of adversity. I just want to stress that we can't always control what happens to us. When adversity happens, often we don't have control over it happening or not happening. But what resilience is aiming to do is being able to moderate the impact, to somehow lessen the impact of that adversity, and to make it easier or make it the bouncing back or the recovery from that adversity, making that a little bit easier to do. Why is it so important? It's important because research has shown us that people who are resilient tend to be able to harness their inner strengths and their external resources to rebound more quickly and more fully from setbacks. So again, as I keep saying, there are inner strengths that you bring to the table, and there are also external resources that we all need to look at to help us become more resilient or stay more resilient. Resilient individuals, there are a lot of good things about resilient individuals. They're more likely to meet the demands of their work and their personal lives successfully. They're more likely to take action to deal with challenges, problems, and setbacks. They tend to know when to stop, rest, and replenish their inner resources. And they seek support and assistance from others when they need it. It's critical that you don't have to do this alone, or that you don't think you have to do this alone. Being resilient, people who are resilient definitely make use of their environment, the people in their environment, what the environment has to offer them. So that's a critical point to remember as we go through this. The good news is we can become more resilient. Resilience doesn't appear to be something that people either have or they do not have. It involves things like thoughts and beliefs, attitudes, emotion regulation, that is being to regulate your emotions, behaviors, and external resources that can be developed. Resilience can be learned, practiced, developed, and strengthened. And again, the key to successful resilience involves both our personal qualities and the external resources that support thriving and respect. For those of you who are interested in this topic, I'm referring you to Michael Unger, who's at the bottom of the screen. He's the Canada Research Chair in Child, Family, and Community Resilience. He's based in Dalhousie at Dalhousie University. And he's written a great book called Change Your World, The Science of Resilience and the True Path to Success. And Unger really stresses that no amount of personal transformation, that is our own personal transformation, is going to make us resilient if we don't also really look at our environment and what the environment offers us. It really makes a huge difference how we are resourced in the environment. So if we don't have good schooling, or we don't have access to health care, or we don't have access to good housing or education, whatever it is, then the resilience in us is not going to be nearly as strong as it would be if we made use, if we had the external resources that I've just mentioned, that we made use of those resources to support us. Now, I'm going to talk first about some of the internal resources or internal assets that contribute to resilience, just to give you a sense of what some of the things are that we found about, that we have found people who are resilient tend to have. So resilient individuals tend to engage in good self-care behavior. In good self-care, that means behaviors, thoughts, and attitudes that support our emotional well-being and physical health. So things like sleeping well, eating well, and exercising well. That's really important to take care of yourself. If your mind and body are in good shape, you're going to be more likely to be more resilient when you're faced with challenges. Again, eating well, sleeping well, and exercising well implies that you have the resources, both internal and external, to do those kinds of things. A sense of optimism about the future. Again, there's a lot of research that suggests that people who have a sense of optimism, who have a future, a look at the future as being optimistic, and the future holds promise. People who are more optimistic about the future tend to be more resilient when they're faced with challenging situations. And how do you become optimistic, or how do you maintain optimism? Well, for one thing, these days, I would suggest limiting as much as you can media intake about all the terrible things that are happening, all the cases and all the deaths and all the lack of health care, particularly right now in the States, that seems to be on the media all the time, how it's getting worse and worse. Focus on some of the positive things that are happening from reliable sources. There are a lot of sources out there, but a lot of them are not reliable. So focus on some of the positive aspects from reliable sources, and try to avoid communicating with people who are worriers. I don't know if you have people or friends like that, but I do. They tend to be worrying all the time, and the more I talk to them, the more depressed I tend to get. So try not to communicate regularly with people who tend to worry all the time and see the worst in everything instead of seeing some of the positive things that are happening. Self-compassion. I'm not sure if you can relate to this or not, but certainly we know that many people tend to be much harder on themselves than they are on their friends or relatives. We tend to give our friends and relatives, we tend to give them a little bit of lots of rope and leeway, but we tend to be very hard on ourselves. Try to be as compassionate and as kind to yourself as you would be to one of your good friends in similar circumstances. I think if you really think about it, you would see that oftentimes you're much more forgiving of your friends than you are of yourself. Forgive yourself for not being perfect during these difficult times. Forgive yourself if you're not doing everything you thought you might be doing by now. If you don't have a job by now, or if you haven't applied to certain positions or to schools or whatever it might be, don't be too hard on yourself. You would probably be very supportive of a friend or a family member if they were in a similar situation. Try to be compassionate and kind to yourself, as compassionate and kind as you would be to a friend or a relative in the same situation. It's really important and helpful in terms of being resilient to have a clear sense of your personal values, a purpose, and having some acknowledgement of the personal responsibility for achieving a positive outcome. It's really important that people have a sense of identity. What do you want to, how do you want to be? What's important to you? What are the things in life that are really important that you hold dear? How do you want people to see you? Keep track and keep on what your personal values are. And the more, the clearer the sense of your personal values, the more you have a very clear direction of how you want to deal with things, and it will help you to become resilient. And during this time, if you're not, don't have a job, or if you're not in school, or you're not sure where things are, and you're sort of in limbo right now, create a mission statement for this period of time. What do you want to accomplish? Even if that's one small thing, what would you like to do? Is it something to fix up in your apartment or your home? Is it something you want to learn, some book you want to read? Create some mission statement that will give you some purpose and value. Now, mindfulness, that may be something some of you have heard of in the past, and we could spend a whole afternoon talking about mindfulness. But for this, for the purpose of today's session, I'm just going to say that mindfulness involves being present in the moment, and rather than dwelling on the past or worrying about the future. A lot of people spend a lot of time worrying about what they did or didn't do in the past, or worrying and being anxious about what might or might not happen in the future. Mindfulness involves being present in the moment, in the present, and really trying to stay focused in the present and dealing with the present rather than wasting a lot of energy worrying about the past or the future. This last bullet point on the screen is a sense of gratitude for the good things in your life. Gratitude is consistently associated with greater happiness. And during times of great uncertainty, it's not easy but it can be helpful to keep a journal, a gratitude journal, and write down at least 3 things for which you are grateful, whether it's a relationship, it's where you live, what you're doing, what the education you're getting, whatever it might be, what you're gratified about, whether it's just taking a walk and being being grateful for nature and what you're seeing as you're walking. Just have a sense of gratitude for the good things in your life, for the good people in your life. That too will help you maintain a sense of resilience in challenging times. Now, those are some of the internal assets that will help people be resilient. But remember, I was saying how important external resources are that contribute to resilience. In fact, without the essential external resources, it's really almost impossible to be very resilient. It can be helpful to do some of the things I'm going to be talking about as we go through these slides, but you really do need to maintain, as best you can, positive, mutually respectful relationships with peers, family members, mentors, or employers who will be there for you when challenging situations like this pandemic occur. And it's not so easy to maintain social connections these days, although it's getting a little bit easier as we have these social bubbles and at least we can see people from a social distance. But cultivating social connections and avoiding social isolation is one of the best ways to build resilience. So I don't need to tell you, I'm sure you all use technology to maintain some of those relationships, but it's particularly important if you want to be resilient to really foster and cultivate those social connections with peers, family members, mentors, or employers, whoever it is that can be helpful to you in maintaining your resilience. Seek advice and support from your social network. There's no shame in asking for help. And again, in fact, it's critical to be resilient that you do ask for help when you feel you need it. I'm going to go back to Michael Unger just for a moment, that fellow at Dalhousie I was talking about, and just want to read a quote from his book. Striving for personal transformation will not make us better when our families, workplaces, communities, healthcare providers, and governments fail to provide us with sufficient care and support. The science shows us that all the internal resources we can muster are seldom of much use without a nurturing environment. And Unger and his team have done many, many studies that have shown time and time again, without the resources in the community, in the environment, without those adequate resources, that internal resources alone are not going to be sufficient. So what you need to think about throughout all of this is, yes, there are things each of us can do to try and be more positive and to do things that can make us more internally resilient, but we're going to need help. That's something that I would call interdependence. We don't have to depend on people, but each of us depend on each other. We are interdependent on each other to help us get through challenging times. So I'm going to talk a little bit about some practical tips that you can think of doing in the face of distress. Most people talk about stress management. I think you all probably know, having gone through this last year of your graduating year, without any stress, you probably wouldn't study, you probably wouldn't do the work you need to get done. There are deadlines that we have to meet, and stress in and of itself is okay. But what we're talking about typically when we say stress management, we're really talking about distress management, when it gets too much and it then can lead to immobilization. And distress can lead to all kinds of negative things like self-defeating processes, worrying, uncomfortable physical symptoms, emotional discomfort, difficulty concentrating, forgetting, being excessively self-critical, being preoccupied with thoughts and worries, getting moody, being anxious, all these things that we don't really want to be spending too much time dealing with. And that's when the stress level is too high and becomes distressful. And what are some of the things that we can do to be resilient in the face of distress? I'm going to spend the next few slides talking about some tips that you might be fine. And again, if you can do any of these, you don't do all of them, but if any of them make sense to you, maybe that'll be helpful. Just take a couple of them, the ones that make sense to you, and see if you can apply them to your life and to dealing with the distress that you might be coping with or trying to cope with. So the first thing, which is probably one of the easiest things to do, is something I'm calling reboot your mood, with 3 to 4 minutes of a silent focus on deep breathing a few times a day. What this means is just taking a few minutes, 3 or 4 minutes, a few times a day, and just relaxing by taking in deep breaths. I'm going to say deep breathing. I'm talking about deep abdominal breathing from the stomach, from the abdomen, and going maybe 4 or 5 breaths a minute, just slow, deep breathing. And as you do that for 3 or 4 minutes, you will begin to feel more relaxed if you're feeling anxious. It's that kind of breathing just physiologically makes you relax a little bit more, and it's incompatible with anxiety and worry. So the simplest thing, we all know how to breathe, but sometimes we just don't take the time to do some deep breathing. Just reboot, take some time, a few times a day as if you're feeling anxious or you're starting to have a loop run around in your head about all the worries that you have, and just do some nice deep breathing a few times a day. And that in and of itself can be helpful to help you get through it. The next thing is something called thought stopping. And thought stopping is basically never finish the worry, always interrupt it. What this means is it's a combination of rebooting your mood that we just talked about and changing the way you think about things. So when you have, I don't know if you've experienced this, but a lot of people sort of describe this loop going round and round in their brain, and they start to worry. For instance, I haven't gotten any interviews yet for a job. I'll never get an interview. Even if I do get an interview, I'll probably mess up the interview. Everybody else is getting interviews, but I'm not getting interviews. They have all these loops about something that they're worried about. And the idea behind thought stopping is to recognize those loops and those thoughts, those negative thoughts, and to counteract those negative thoughts by coming up with positive thoughts. So it's the opposite. So you say, I'll never get an interview. You say, I've had interviews before. I'm sure I'll get one. It might be slow now, but it'll speed up as time goes along. Or if I'll never get an interview, you say, yeah, I probably will get an interview if I just keep at it. Or I'll just have some leads. Whatever. You just start using different thoughts, positive thoughts, to counteract the negative thoughts. And my suggestion to you would be to write down those positive thoughts, just to the ones that will counter the negative thoughts. So that when the negative thoughts enter your brain, that first negative thought, you say to yourself, stop. And then you engage in that deep breathing that we just talked about, that 3 or 4 minutes of silent, deep breathing a few times a day, where you just focus on your slow breathing, 4 or 5 breaths per minute. And that helps you to relax. And as you relax, after that, you substitute that negative self-talk with positive self-talk, the things you wrote down that can counteract the negative thoughts. So again, as soon as a worry enters your head, you internally say, stop. You relax by doing the deep breathing for 3 or 4 or 5 minutes. Relax, and then substitute those positive self-statements that you wrote down. If you know them without looking at the sheet where you wrote them down, all the better. But if not, use that sheet and start using those positive self-statements instead of the negative self-statements. That will begin to break that worry loop, that anxiety loop. The next one is try to maintain perspective and avoid being a quick sinker. I'm not sure where I saw the term quick sinker, but it's maybe you know people like this, where whatever it is, it's always the worst. They go right to the quick sinking. Everything is the worst. Everything's rated a 10 on a scale of 1 to 10, where 10 is the worst. Everything is a 10. And try to maintain perspective by remembering that things could be worse. And I mean, you probably in your own life can think of examples where this was the case, where you thought the world was coming to an end when you got maybe a bad grade in one of your courses. And yet life went on, and you could recover. And it really wasn't a 10, it might have been a 5 or a 6, but it wasn't the worst. It was something much less than the worst. And it's worth remembering that even in very difficult times, for instance, when in the worst of the pandemic, I recall in Canada, in Nova Scotia, early on, the pandemic was really ravaging Nova Scotia. And then all of a sudden there was, maybe some of you remember, this active shooter in this very small community. So all of a sudden the pandemic, which seemed like the worst thing that could happen to people, was really not the worst. Unfortunately, they had to deal with some very, very difficult things with this active shooter, and people lost lives and people lost loved ones. So there's always other things that can be worse. And so it's important to try and keep perspective so you don't get immobilized by a challenge that you have to face. Try to keep it in perspective. Focus on what you can control. Again, we can't always control when bad things happen or how difficult those bad things are, but we can focus on what we can control. We can focus on how we react to what is happening to us. Accept and adjust the things that you can't change. Don't waste a lot of energy saying, oh, if only it was like this, if only it was like that. Accept and adjust to the things that you cannot change. And try to shift your perspective, reframe the problem by turning a crisis into a challenge or opportunity. You've probably heard this before. And again, it's not so easy to turn a crisis into a challenge or opportunity if you don't have the external resources to do that. But you need to try to get yourself in situations where you maintain your perspective, you focus on what you can control, and you don't waste energy trying to change things that you cannot control. Make use of positive distractions, read novels, watch comedies, listen to music, exercise, take walks if it's possible to do any of those things safely. Use distractions so that you're not always thinking about the difficult things that you may have to overcome in your life. Focus on acts of kindness. I'm going to spend a little bit of time on this. Remember, we are all in this together. Again, I recognize we are all in this together, but for some people, it's more difficult than for others. Again, marginalized groups, people in poverty, racialized groups, indigenous groups, the elderly, people with disabilities, various disabilities. Some of this is much more difficult for them than it is for some of us. But remember that we are all in this together, and reach out and do something good for other people. It will help them and it will help you at the same time. Volunteer, check in with your family or neighbors. If you're in a position to do so, donate to a worthy cause. Whatever you can do to help people, that's really something that can be helpful, very helpful to them. And the nice thing about it is that it's also going to be helpful to you, the helper. There's actually something called the helper's high. And psychologists have shown that helping others can produce feel-good neurotransmitters such as oxytocin, which make us feel better. And so there's a lot of research that says helper therapy actually has been shown to have therapeutic benefits for the helper just as much as it has for others that you're assisting. So helping others is a really great thing to do when we're all in a difficult situation. It'll help them and it'll also help you. When all of this, when you think about all of this, sometimes, there's an expression saying, if I don't laugh, I'm going to cry. Laughter can be the best medicine sometimes. And laughter is electrochemical. It releases endorphins in the brain that can minimize discomfort and help bring about feelings of general well-being. I don't mean to minimize the difficulties people may be facing, but sometimes you do have to have a sense of humor and just laugh about it so you can get through it. This one, this little cartoon, maybe you've seen it. Everything seems to take more thought and effort these days. And this little puppy who's, I'm now ready to go poop now. So even pooping apparently takes a lot more thought and consideration and care these days. So I'm going to now show you this brief video clip about resilience in Toronto. And we're going to hope that the YouTube works for you.
Every so often, the collective consciousness of our entire nation, from coast to coast to coast, is captured by a single solitary event. Unfortunately, it is often a terrible tragedy that brings us together. Last week in Canada, such a terrible tragedy occurred, a catastrophe that will affect the country for decades to come. There was snow on the streets of Toronto. Snow in Toronto. We're not making this up.
I remember it just like it was last week. I opened the door and looked out, and there it was. It was everywhere. I'm sorry. This is hard.
I'm just stepping in because we can hear that there's snow, but we can't actually see the YouTube. I'm jumping in, and I wish on a day like today there actually was snow in Toronto. but you might have to actually, so technical difficulties are a new thing. We have to be, develop our resilient skills in dealing with
Okay.
technology and doing these things. So I'm not sure if you want to try that again and maybe click on the Zoom, but I don't think from the questions that are coming in, I don't think anyone was able to see it, that we were able to hear it.
Okay, I don't see my YouTube, so I only see you right now.
Okay. So do you want to perhaps launch the your PowerPoint and sort of continue on?
Okay. But I can't stop the YouTube.
You might be able to try showing it from your browser share screen from Firefox. Are you able to get back to your PowerPoint?
No. I can't stop it though.
Okay, well, we can't hear it. We can just hear you.
Okay, so I need to get out of, I don't see the YouTube to stop it. That's the problem at the moment.
Okay. And can you hear it on your end?
Yes.
Okay.
Okay.
And so we need one of these young grads to, to help us out figuring it out. One of my colleagues is saying just try showing it in your browser share screen. You can minimize Zoom and find your YouTube. So you can minimize Zoom on your top right with the minimize button.
Okay, let me get back to.
Okay. And to our participants, sorry for these technical difficulties.
Sorry about that, everybody.
These are a part of the game as we are all learning to adjust to a new reality. So thank you all for bearing with us. And
maybe we'll send out the link to people because it's kind of a funny clip, but we'll just go on from here.
Yeah, we can definitely send out the link to everyone who.
Okay. The point of the clip, unfortunately, that you weren't able to see, is that aside from having a good laugh, that it's basically saying that the event, in that case it was snow in Toronto, caused a lot of emotional distress, but it wasn't really the event. It was our thoughts and beliefs about the event. We can't control if bad things happen, but we can control how we choose to react to those bad things. So nobody controls your thinking but you. So that's what the point of that clip was. And again, sorry, I'm not sure why the video didn't show. Now, there are 3 Ps that tend to inhibit coping and recovery. And that's, again, the way we think about things. One of them is personalization. That is the idea that what happened to you is all your fault. People sometimes tend to take all responsibility for everything bad that happens, when in fact, there are many, many reasons that things happen. And again, it may be that the environment you're living in is not providing you with enough opportunity or resources to get through difficult times. So don't take it all on yourself. The other P in this is pervasiveness, that what's going on, the bad thing that's happening, excuse me, it may affect all aspects of your life. And that's, again, that's a way of thinking that can be changed. It's not everything that will be affected. It may be parts of your life that will be affected, but not everything will be affected. It's not pervasive for everything about you. And the third one I want to just mention is something called permanence. That is that the negative impact of an adverse event will last forever. And again, that's faulty thinking in a sense. It's not going to last forever. And in fact, with this pandemic, we really have to fight that thought. I don't know how many of you have read or heard about Viktor Frankl. He wrote a fabulous book. He wrote many things, but he wrote a fabulous book called Man's Search for Meaning, which I strongly recommend you read if you haven't. And Viktor Frankl was an Austrian Jew during the Second World War. And he was taken to a Nazi death camp along with almost everybody in his family. And he lost just about everyone in his family. He was the only one that survived the death camp. And even then, he talked about, we have freedom to choose. And what Frankl says is, everything can be taken from a person but one thing, the last of human freedoms, to choose one's attitude in any set of circumstances, to choose one's own way. Now, I can't think of anything much worse than a Nazi death camp. There may be things as bad at the moment, I can't think of them. But even surviving that awful situation, he came out of it saying, you still have the ability to choose your own attitude in any set of circumstances, to react in your own way, to choose your own way. So just try and keep that in mind when you're dealing with difficult circumstances. That you may not be able to control the circumstance, but you can control how you react to it. So we need to fight the sense that the current pandemic and the associated restrictions will never end. That sense of permanence, it sometimes feels like that, but it will end. It most definitely will end. So this is back in March when my daughter Laura came to go for a walk with us. And of course we couldn't walk together. It was at that point, it was only social distancing. And now in June 15th, these are two of my granddaughters. And we're getting closer to something better than what we have. And now that we have a social circle, our granddaughters actually can hug them after four months or so of not hugging them. So hopefully things will get better for you as well as we all navigate through these difficult times. I'm going to try this YouTube, and again, hopefully it'll work. Give me a second here. This is to remind you that external resources are really important. And You've Got a Friend is one of those songs that I hope will remind you of that. I'm going to try it this way and see if it works.
And you might need to try sharing your screen again. So give it a try and we'll talk through it. If
Not
we'll
showing. Okay.
So on our end, Mark, we can't see or hear anything, and I think it is appearing for you.
Okay.
I would sing You've Got a Friend, but I think we would just upset people.
Right.
You could try sharing it directly from your Firefox, from your browser. That might work.
Well, at this point, I think it'd probably be better to share the links because I'm not getting anywhere. So.
Okay, so let's do that, and I'll let you go back, and then we can take some questions from our wonderful grads that are in the audience.
Okay. Are you seeing anything on your screen?
The only thing that we can see is you.
Fantastic. Well, why don't you go with me?
That is wonderful. You're our guest of honor. Well, as our class of 2020 are our real guests of honor, but we're delighted that you are honoring them.
Okay, let me just try this one more time.
Yes, we can see that now.
Okay.
Go ahead.
Okay, so that's where we're at, and that's the. I'm going to try this. Let's just try one more time.
Take 62. No. Here we go. Please hold. You're down.
And you know wherever I am, I'll come running, 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 running to see you again, to see you again. In the spring, summer, or fall, all you need to do is call and I'll be there. I won't hurt you, desert you, or leave you Ain't it good to know you got a friend like me? I won't desert you. I'll never desert you. I'll never leave you. 'Cause you ain't good to know you got a friend like me. I won't desert you. I'll be right You've got a friend. You got a friend. You got a friend.
Okay. I hope people heard that. I don't know.
We sure did, and got a few chuckles and a big smile on my face, and I hope, and I'm sure that the rest of our participants experienced that as well.
Great. Well, that's about it for me, unless there's some questions. Thanks. I'm sorry for the technical problems, but I hope it was okay.
No, it was really, really wonderful, Mark. Thank you so much. You know, I've been to sessions like these, and it's in times like these that these reminders, these tips, just to be able to breathe, when you talked about the importance of breathing, actually made a difference to me personally. So a big thanks to you for volunteering your time to be here with us. We do have time for some questions, and so I will invite our audience to put their questions into the Q&A area, and I'll ask them to you on their behalf. Okay,
Great.
and I want to just quickly address, or not quickly, I'd like to address some of the questions that came in earlier. There was a question or comment that came in from Ranjit, and I really appreciate that sentiment. And our students and our grads are really wonderful in that our collective social conscious is really strong, and well, this is reflected in the questions that we're seeing. For those folks, and I'm just going to actually answer the question myself, for those folks who are interested in learning more about the university's commitment to social justice and some of the initiatives that we are undertaking, they're really well documented on the York Alumni website. The president herself has released a number of messages, so please visit the website. And if you have any trouble finding the resources you're looking for, please feel free to contact me directly, and I'll put my email in afterwards, and I'm happy to take those questions. I'm going to turn it over to questions to you, and I'll take the first question comes from Rowan, and I'll read it out. Rowan says, "Hi, Allison and Mark. A lot of us are using this time to examine our privileges and complicity with racism. Can you offer direction on how to be resilient in this challenging process?"
I'm sorry, I didn't catch the first part of the question.
Okay, it's an easy question to start with. No, it's not. It's a really difficult one. Rowan says, "A lot of us are using this time to examine our privileges and complicity with racism. Can you offer direction on how to be resilient in this challenging process?"
Yeah, thanks for that question, Rowan. You know, it isn't an easy question. It certainly isn't easy to answer. But I think it goes back to what I was saying earlier, that we all have to really look at how this pandemic and how other things are impacting people differentially. And whatever we can do, whether it's calling it out, whether it's supporting causes, however we can, whether it's volunteering, whether it's you know, advocating with government, whatever it might be, if it's a university, whatever it might be, to call out what we see either as racism or ineffective policies around poverty or housing or whatever it might be. I think that helps to make us all more resilient, because we're really talking about resilience in our community, not individual resilience. I think really what you're talking about is how can our community be resilient? And I think we all have to work together very, very strongly to get that to happen.
Thank you for that. That's a good question. Another question comes in from Maheen, and folks, I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your names, but Maheen asks, what role can spirituality play in maintaining good mental health?
That's another great question. So again, whatever works for different people is what you need to do, and you need to find your niche. If it's spirituality, if that's what helps, if it's organized religion, not organized religion, whatever it might be that can be helpful to you to create a sense of hope, of optimism rather than pessimism and despair, that's a very, very useful thing to do and to make use of. Again, there are different things that will be helpful for different people, but spirituality is one of those things that can be very, very powerful for folks.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you for that. Ranjith asks a question, and I'll read it out. Ranjith asks, can you please suggest some coping mechanisms for vicarious trauma? And this is directly related to the work I'm doing with LGBTQ+ refugees on the front line.
Wow, these questions. How about, like, is positive thinking helpful? No, look, vicarious trauma is a real issue. And we probably don't have time for me to get into a lot of this now, but one of the major things to do for vicarious trauma is to make sure you have a support network of people where you can debrief and where you can feel supported about what you're going through and what you're dealing with as you're helping people with the traumas they're dealing with. So it's a very, very big area, and that's the best I can say right now, other than thank you for the work you're doing.
Thank you for that. And I think a number of people actually have questions about your career path. So I'll ask a question that came from before we started this talk, because we've concluded the live questions that are coming in. Carly asked if you can speak to your career path and your journey in your field.
How much time do we have? About 2 or 3 minutes, right?
Yeah, in 2 minutes or less, please.
Yeah,
A whole career.
Yeah, well, my career path is a very odd one. It's sort of, but I will say that the most important thing about my career path, the most important thing was the connections I made with people. Because every step along the way, for every job I ever had, it was because I got to know people who got to know me. And when the time came to hire somebody, they tended to look at me and say, oh, he seems like a good guy. Maybe we should hire him. Or maybe we should accept him to a graduate program, or whatever it might be. So I started off working as a tutor way back when I was at McGill University as an undergrad. And then that person who hired me as a tutor got me to work at a camp for kids with learning disabilities and behavior problems. And then that person said I should be the director of that camp, and then that's on and on and on. And so really the best thing I can say is that in terms of a career path, I gradually moved my way into getting into a graduate program at York, first at the University of Michigan, then at York University. And the rest is history.
Oh, wonderful, wonderful.
But make connections, That's so, so important.
Right, absolutely. And to our newest grads, please explore the Alumni and Friends website to learn about some of the things that you can do to make connections. You know, now that you're an alum, or if those of you who are still students are looking to connect with alumni are here to help. We're, you know, a big group, but alumni are certainly here to help. Okay, so in the interest of time, we do have to wrap up today. And so on behalf of all of us in the class of 2020, Mark, I do want to really thank you for being here and for sharing your wisdom and your knowledge with us. As a token of thanks on your behalf, we've made a donation to York's emergency COVID-19 student relief fund. There are a lot of students who are suffering, and the university is doing our best to support them, thanks to generous donors. So we've made a donation on your behalf.
Great.
And I would like to conclude the event by asking the same question that we asked at the beginning of the session. So the poll will appear for those of you on our Zoom, and wondering how you'd answer it now. So how confident are you about being able to meet any of the coming challenges in the next several months? I'll give you a moment or two to answer that. By answering this question, you're helping us to inform our programs and helping us figure out how we can best meet your needs. Also, feel free to add in any comments or suggestions or thoughts about how we can best support and help you as your needs evolve. Feel free to write that into the Q&A. or to email me, or to email alumni@yorku.ca. That's probably easier to remember than my email address. So feel free to share those thoughts or suggestions in the at alumni@yorku.ca. So there was a lot of material covered. We're very grateful to Mark, an alum himself, and longtime member of the York professional community, for being here with us today. And we're very grateful to you, our participants, for taking the time and staying with us as we discuss this difficult topic. We hope that you learned a thing or two, got a tip or two to make the journey just a little bit easier and feel a little bit more capable of managing adversity as it comes along, as it's inevitably going to do. This talk was recorded and it'll be available on the Alumni and Friends YouTube channel, so please feel free to revisit it should you wish, or to refer your friends to it. And to learn more about us, we're on social media, so alumni activities, alumni stories appear on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. And then we've got an old school website. So again, congratulations to the class of 2020, and we wish you all the very, very best from this alumni family of 325. Congratulations, and enjoy these next